guys, this is Taylor at GoPowerSports. Today we're going to walk you through the whole process of ordering and building your Lil Rascal.
Visit GoPowerSports.com and type in Lil Rascal Kit in the search box. Choose which options you prefer on your Lil Rascal and then add to cart. Other items you may need to turn your roller into a rider would be an engine, Stage 1 Performance Kit with a GPS 0010 side exit header pipe, fuel line and fuel filter, and if you have a new engine, you will also need oil.
We're going to start with this Tillotson 212 engine. We ordered the Stage 1 kit with it. We're going to take off the air box, exhaust, and install the parts. So the first thing we're going to do is prep this engine in order to put on all these parts. We'll take off the exhaust, the air filter box, trim some lines, and get it ready. You will start by taking off your exhaust. This is a 13mm socket. The first thing I do is cut this fuel tank vent. Then take off the air box. On these Tillotsons, they have a little EPA box on the bottom. We'll remove that as well. This valve cover vent, I'll typically just cut it right after the first 90 and point it down. You don't get hardly any oil coming out of here anyway because there's a baffle inside of this valve cover. While we're here, we might as well loosen your throttle bracket. Make sure that's free. Now we're going to take off the carburetor. We'll pop the bowl off and install the bigger jet. This is a 10mm socket to remove the bowl. Use a flathead screwdriver. Remove the stock jet. This is our 038 main jet. Now that the carburetor has the bigger jet, we will put it back onto the engine. Put your rubber air cleaner spacer back on. Next up is the air filter adapter. On your air filter, you can use either a flathead screwdriver or a Phillips. Okay, the intake side is complete. Now we're going to flip it over and do the exhaust. So we're going to take off the spark plug cap, move your throttle to the open position. That allows you to get onto this bolt with an 8mm. And on the front, pop these off. This is our bare Lil Rascal frame. First thing we're going to do is our neck bolt assembly. On this bolt you have your two bushings, and we will use the bolt to act as a driver to hammer these in. For ease of assembly, you really need to deburr or bevel the DOM tubing that is the neck. What you're going to do is get both of your bushings in place with your bolt or guide in. Hold your bottom one kind of in the groove. You can get the top one started, flip your bolt around, Now that these bronze bushings are driven into place, we can put on our front fork assembly. There is a slight variance in the measurement from top to bottom on the inside. Sometimes you need to add a washer to act as a spacer, sometimes you don't. On this one, it is a fairly tight fit, so we will not need to add one of these washers. So you're going to get one washer. On your bolt. And then a washer and your lock nut on the bottom. To tighten these, you will need either a 19 or 3/4 wrench, two of them, or socket. And the amount that you tighten it is important. If you go too tight, then you will get kind of a funky steering. It'll be real, almost wobbly feeling. If you go too loose, then you get some up and down play. What I typically do is tighten it all the way, make sure your nut is through that lock. As you can see, this is really tight. That's going to really affect the ride of this little rascal. It will not be smooth. I'm going to back this nut off just a little bit until it is free. You don't want to feel any drag, really anyway. That feels really good. This is our front axle. It is a 12mm axle. You have your spacers, which are an equal size, so it doesn't matter which side you put one on, and then your lock nut. Slide your wheel into place. You'll put one spacer in between the fork and the wheel, slide your bolt through. Once you get it coming through the other side of the wheel, you can put your other spacer on. Because of the crush sleeve that's in between the bearings on this wheel, you can really torque down that axle nut pretty tight. On this rear wheel, on your valve stem side, that is where you're going to put your brake disc. Because the sprocket is solid, you can't get you to your tire to adjust your air pressure. With these slotted holes, it'll make it easy to get to that valve stem. It is a good idea to start all of these bolts by hand before you go in and tighten them with your impact or your wrench. Once you have them all started, you can go in and tighten these down alternating pattern. And on the other side, we will do the sprocket. Same thing on this side. Start all your bolts by hand and then go in and tighten them up. Put your rear wheel in place. You have your rear axle, the lock nut again, and two equal spacers. Does not matter what side you put these on. And you will start your bolt, put the spacer on, lock nut. This rear wheel has a crush sleeve as well, so you can get this actual nut pretty tight. So your foot peg grips, these are really easy to put on. You don't need any WD-40 or anything. You just slide them on by hand. They're a pretty nice fit. Put your kickstand in place and the pin through. And then you can go ahead and put your cotter pin back in. Once you get your cotter pin in, you can go ahead and bend around the ends to get them out of the way and make it easier to put your spring on. Next up, we have the chain roller, chain tensioner. First, you will put your bolt through. Flat washer, which rides against your chain tensioner bracket. Then your lock washer, which acts as a kind of a shim that just pushes against your inside part of the bearing. Lock washer again, and nut. On these brake calipers, you have two Allen bolts that are used for adjustment. What we're going to do before we assemble it is back these all the way out, and then after we get it mounted, we can adjust these to center up the disc in the middle of the caliper. Before assembly, you can put the caliper on to kind of eyeball how many shims you're going to need. On this one, we're going to use all of the washers included in the kit. So we will have 2 washers on the front and 2 washers in the back. We're going to put our 1 bolt in with the 2 washers, and we will start this by hand. And then the 2 in the back. Now you can come in with your wrench or your impact and tighten these. Right now, it's not very centered, but what we can do is go back, run these in, and it can space the caliper away from the disc. Next up is the brake lever. You can use your same 5mm Allen wrench that you use to adjust the brake caliper to loosen this pinch bolt. We will do a final adjustment once we get our grip on. The brake cable has 2 ends. This barrel shape is what goes into your lever. On the opposite end, there is a round ball. That will need to be cut off. Loosen your jam nut on the caliper. You slide your cable housing and cable through this first piece and then right through the hole. Next up, we have our throttle cable and kill switch, and the throttle assembly with the grips. This is a 4mm Allen wrench. After you get part of your throttle assembly apart with your 4mm Allen wrench, you will put the cable to roughly about there. This is the throttle cable guide, and then your barrel end goes in this slot right here. This is the stop of the throttle tube. That stop will actually go in and stop up against that black guide that we pressed in. Top piece back on. Start your 2 bolts. And you can finish tightening once you slide it on the bike. What I like to do, slide your throttle tube all the way on until it bottoms out up against the end of the handlebar, and then back it back out just a tad so that you don't have your throttle tube riding up against the end of the handlebar. That'll cause it to kind of bind and it won't function as smoothly. Next up is the kill switch. We're going to wedge that right in between the brake lever and the grip. That'll give you a pretty clean look on this brake side. And the proper way to put this on, wires coming out are always going to be at the bottom. With the Lil Rascal seat, you're going to place it on the frame, and this is so we can mark our holes to drill the pilot holes for the screws. You want to center it, pretty much center it right on the frame tubes on the front and the back. Hold it in place and mark your holes with a Sharpie. And then with a 1/4 inch bit, you're going to drill your pilot hole. You put this seat on the bike. It makes it very easy if you go ahead and start a bolt in each hole to get your threads. Once you have all your threads, you put it back on the bike. And run your bolts. Alright, now we have our gas tank, which is an 8-inch long. It's got your vent filter, you get a petcock, 2 clamps, and your gas tank bracket. We're going to bolt this on to the frame first. After those are tight, you set your tank in the cradle and just run your straps around these 2 pieces of flat. Now for the on-off valve, it is good to use some sort of fuel resistant sealant. We use this gasket compound, it holds up pretty well. Last piece to put on before we put on the engine is going to be our decorative top plate. We have these lasered here in Texas. It's going to go right here on top, matches up with your 4 slots on the frame, and you have 4 6mm bolts and 4 6mm nuts to hold it on. Now before we put on the last few pieces of the kit, like the chain guard and clutch and chain, we got to put on the engine. In this kit you get an engine mount pack. You have 4 5/16 bolts, 4 5/16 flat washers, and 4 5/16 serrated nuts. Okay, so at this point we have our engine loosely bolted on. The chain roller is loose and in the forwardmost position. Now we can put the clutch on, wrap the chain around, cut it to length, and then tighten everything up. Before you slide the clutch on, you want to start your chain guard bolts. Now you're going to leave these loose, do not tighten them yet. Now you can slide your clutch on, and run the bolt and washer on the end of the crank. Now before we wrap our chain around, it's easier now to put the chain guard on and get these bolts tight with your either 13 or 1/2 inch wrench. Okay, now that those are tight, we can open up our chain, wrap it around, cut it to length, and then put on the master link. Now when putting on the master link clip, you want the closed end pointing forward. You always want this open end trailing. You do not want it pointing in the direction that your chain is going. So the chain's going this way, you want it pointing in that direction. And as for the tension, you want about 3/8 play up and down on the chain either way. So to achieve that, you can get your engine, you know, close, roughly where it needs to be. Then you can do your final adjustment with this chain roller. Now with these engine slots, where they're located, all the guesswork is pretty much taken out of the equation. All you got to do is run your clutch inboard, your slots, no matter what engine you're using, 212, 225, 79, it just lines right up. Makes it pretty easy. Up next we have our fuel line and fuel filter, which attach to the tank first and then run it up to the carburetor. Today we're using 3/16. To get the 3/16 onto this on-off valve, you just heat it up a little bit with a lighter and then it will press right on. After you get that on and in position, you can feed your fuel line through. Twist your petcock around to where it makes it a straight shot. We're going to put our fuel filter right before this vent filter, and we can kind of attach them together to keep this fuel line steady. Okay, up next we have our throttle cable, which we're going to use on this mount right here. Then we will hook up our kill switch, tidy up all the lines, oil and gas, and we'll be ready to go. Due to variances in the barrel ends and the barrel clamp for the cable, occasionally, well, you can clip this off, but I like to leave it on, because if you leave it on and you get it through there, then that cable's not coming out once you get that screw down. So we're going to drill that hole out just a tiny bit so that this one fits. If you don't have this angled screwdriver, you can just pop the seat off and it'll make it a lot easier to get to all these parts. Alright guys, that sums up our Lil Rascal how-to build. Hopefully this helps you. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email. But if you follow this video, do exactly as we did, you should have no issues. Thanks.